The wilderness was vast, untouched by man, where towering trees whispered secrets to the wind, and rivers carved their way through the land like veins of an ancient world. It was a place ruled by nature's law, where the strong thrived and the weak perished. In this unforgiving realm, a mother bear roamed with her young cub, a small ball of fur barely strong enough to walk. She was his protector, his guide, his entire world. She had fought off predators, braved harsh winters, and endured hunger to keep her cub alive. Every day she taught him the ways of survival, how to fish, where to find shelter, and which scents to avoid. He was still learning, his paws clumsy on the forest floor, his instincts not yet sharpened. But under her watchful eye he was safe, at least for now. One fateful evening, as the golden sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the land, tragedy struck. A distant gunshot rang through the air, sending birds into a frenzy, their wings slicing the sky in panic. The cub flinched at the sound, his small body trembling as his mother staggered beside him. She let out a low, guttural groan, confusion clouding her eyes. Blood seeped from her thick fur, staining the ground beneath her. She tried to stay on her feet, but her strength gave way. With one final, desperate glance at her cub, she collapsed. The forest fell silent. The cub nudged her with his tiny nose, letting out soft whimpers, but she did not move. The warmth of her body faded with every passing moment, leaving him alone in the chilling embrace of the wild. Night fell, and with it, a terrifying loneliness settled in. The cub did not understand death, but he understood absence. His mother was gone, and she was never coming back. Hunger clawed at his belly, but more than that, fear crept into his heart. He was defenseless. He wandered through the dense underbrush, his small frame barely visible against the towering trees. His cries went unanswered. There was no comforting nuzzle, no protective embrace, only the whispers of the wind and the distant howls of creatures lurking in the darkness. Days passed. The cub, too young to hunt, relied on sheer desperation to survive. He licked morning dew from leaves, chewed on bark, and scavenged whatever scraps he could find. His body grew weak, his steps unsteady. Every movement felt like a battle against exhaustion, yet the worst was yet to come. Unbeknownst to the cub, his lonely trek through the forest had not gone unnoticed. Hidden between the shadows, eyes watched him, cold, calculating, and filled with hunger. He was not alone, and soon he would find himself in the most dangerous moment of his short life. The sun had disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving behind a deep, suffocating darkness. The forest, once a sanctuary, had transformed into an abyss where danger lurked unseen. The little cub, exhausted and starving, stumbled through the thick underbrush, his tiny paws sinking into the damp earth. His body ached from the endless wandering, his stomach twisted in hunger. Every step became heavier, his energy fading like the dying embers of a fire. But something else moved in the darkness. The air had changed, thick with an unfamiliar scent. It was musky, sharp, laced with a primal intensity that sent shivers through the cub's frail body. Instinctively, he froze. The wind carried with it a chilling whisper, the sound of something moving in the shadows. Leaves rustled, branches creaked, but these were not the sounds of the wind. He was being watched. High above, the moon peeked through the thick canopy, casting silver light onto the forest floor. That was when the cub saw them. Glowing eyes, not one pair, not two, but many, flickering like distant lanterns in the night, staring at him from the depths of the trees. Their eerie glow sent a fresh wave of terror through the cub, his breath hitching in his throat. He did not understand what they were, but his instincts screamed at him to run. Wolves, a pack of them, hidden within the shadows, waiting, stalking. These were no ordinary predators. They were seasoned hunters, ruthless and patient. They had sensed his weakness long before he had noticed them. Hunger burned in their eyes, and in their world, the orphaned cub was nothing more than an easy meal. The cub took a hesitant step back, his trembling legs struggling to keep him upright. His heart pounded against his ribs, the sound of it deafening in his ears. He let out a tiny, frightened whimper, but the wolves did not flinch. If anything, they moved closer. The pack leader, a towering beast with a coat as dark as the night, stepped forward. His massive paws barely made a sound against the soft earth. His muscles rippled beneath his fur, every movement calculated, every step a warning. He was testing the cub, gauging how much fight it had left. The answer was simple: none. The cub's body quivered as he shrank closer to the ground. He had no mother to protect him, no strength to defend himself, no chance to escape. The wolves knew it. Slowly they began to spread out, encircling him, cutting off any path to freedom. Their low growls filled the silence, a dreadful symphony of impending doom. Their eyes locked onto their target, unblinking, unwavering. The cub tried to move, but his legs buckled beneath him. He collapsed onto the forest floor, panting heavily. His tiny chest heaved, his breaths short and shallow. The world around him blurred as exhaustion and fear clouded his mind. Then the leader of the pack stepped closer. His snout wrinkled as he bared his fangs, a deep, guttural growl rumbling from within his throat. Drool dripped from his sharp teeth, his hunger evident. His muscles coiled, ready to lunge. The cub let out one final desperate cry, but in the vast wilderness, no one was listening. At least that was what the wolves thought. Just as the pack prepared to strike, a sound echoed through the trees, a deep, earth-shaking sound, a growl, but it did not come from the wolves. The air around them grew still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The wolves hesitated, their ears flicking in the direction of the sound. A shadow moved among the trees, unseen but undeniably there. Something big, something powerful. The pack leader let out a snarl, but even he took a cautious step back. Whatever was lurking in the darkness was not prey. It was something else entirely, something that had just turned the hunter into the hunted. The moment of hesitation was brief, but it was enough to shift the energy in the air. The wolves, once confident in their hunt, now stood still, their ears flicking in the direction of the unknown threat. The cub, too weak to understand, could only watch as tension crackled around him like a brewing storm. He shivered, not knowing whether this unseen force was a savior or just another predator waiting for its turn. Then the silence broke. A rustling in the bushes, heavy footfalls. The wolves turned their heads, their bodies low to the ground, ready to attack or retreat at the first sign of danger. The leader of the pack let out a sharp snarl, trying to assert dominance over whatever lurked in the shadows. But the growl that answered was deeper, more menacing, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the trees themselves. The wolves knew this was no ordinary animal. It was something strong, something that did not fear them. The cub lay motionless, his tiny frame curled against the forest floor. His heart raced, his breath shallow, his body too weak to fight or flee. His survival was no longer in his own hands. A sudden movement, a dark blur. The wolves reacted instantly, snapping their jaws and bristling their fur. Their muscles tensed as they prepared to defend their claim. But the growl that followed made even the most fearless among them hesitate. The air was thick with the scent of something ancient, something with power that demanded respect. The leader of the pack was the first to step forward, his head held high, his golden eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. The other wolves followed his lead, forming a tight semicircle around the cub. Their hunger had not diminished, their determination had not wavered. Whatever was coming, they would not give up their prey so easily. The bushes trembled again, and then silence. The wolves held their breath. Then, like a ghost emerging from the mist, a massive figure stepped forward. At first, the cub thought it was another bear, but as the creature moved into the moonlight, the truth became clear. It was a wolf, but unlike any the cub had ever seen. This wolf was enormous, its frame towering over the others. Its fur, once thick and proud, was now streaked with scars, its ears ragged from old battles. It carried an air of authority, of wisdom earned through years of struggle. And yet its eyes were not filled with hunger or cruelty. They held something else, something unreadable. The pack hesitated. This was not a stranger to them. They knew this wolf. They had once followed it, but time had changed things, and the leader of the pack now stood in its place. The scarred wolf locked eyes with the pack leader. A silent battle of dominance unfolded in that instant. The younger wolf stood tall, refusing to back down. The rest of the pack inched forward, their paws shifting against the dirt. They had followed the new leader for seasons, had trusted its strength, had hunted under its command. They would not abandon their claim without a fight. The cub let out a weak whimper, drawing their attention back to the reason they were here. He was helpless, an easy kill, and yet the scarred wolf did not move to attack. Instead, it stepped between the pack and the cub. The younger wolf bristled, baring its teeth, a low growl escaping its throat. The challenge had been made. The scarred wolf did not flinch. It held its ground, staring into the younger wolf's eyes with the weight of a past it had no need to explain. The forest was silent, the trees standing as quiet witnesses to the standoff. The pack leader took a step forward, a warning in its stance. The scarred wolf did not budge. Then, without breaking its gaze, it let out a single, powerful growl, a command, one that would change everything. The growl that rumbled from the scarred wolf's throat was deep and commanding, a sound that cut through the night like a blade. It was not a challenge, it was a warning, a declaration of dominance. The pack leader stiffened, its golden eyes narrowing as it took in the older wolf's stance. The air between them was thick with unspoken history, a power struggle years in the making. The rest of the pack remained still, their muscles coiled, their instincts warring between loyalty and fear. This was no ordinary rogue wolf standing before them. This was once their leader, the wolf that had guided them through countless hunts, the wolf that had protected them until it had vanished. And now it had returned, standing between them and their prey. The cub, still too weak to comprehend the battle unfolding above him, let out a feeble whimper. The sound shattered the fragile silence, drawing the younger wolf's attention back to the helpless creature on the ground. Hunger was a cruel master, and the pack leader would not let its prize slip away without a fight. With a snarl it lunged. The scarred wolf was faster. With a speed that defied its age, it met the younger wolf head-on, their bodies colliding with a force that sent dust and leaves flying. Jaws snapped, claws scraped against fur, and the sound of snarls and growls filled the forest like a violent storm. The pack watched in tense silence, their instincts demanding they intervene, but they did not move. This was a battle of alphas, and only one could emerge victorious. The younger wolf, strong and fearless, tried to overpower its opponent with brute force. It lunged again, aiming for the throat, but the scarred wolf sidestepped at the last moment, twisting its body with practiced precision. Its fangs found purchase on the younger wolf's shoulder, clamping down with enough pressure to send a clear message: submit or suffer. The younger wolf yelped, stumbling back, blood staining its dark fur. But it was not done. It snarled, shaking off the pain, preparing to charge again. The scarred wolf did not give it the chance. In a final decisive movement, it lunged, knocking the younger wolf onto its back. With a swift and merciless bite, it pinned its opponent by the throat. Not enough to kill, but enough to assert its dominance. The pack tensed. The forest held its breath. The younger wolf lay motionless, its chest rising and falling in shallow pants. It did not struggle. It did not fight back. It understood. It had lost. The scarred wolf held its grip for a moment longer, then released. It stepped back, its gaze never leaving its fallen opponent. This was not a kill. This was a lesson, a reminder of who truly ruled these woods. The younger wolf slowly pushed itself up, its ears pinned back, its pride wounded more than its body. It glanced at the pack, then at the cub still curled against the forest floor. A choice had to be made. Then, with a low growl, the younger wolf turned. It did not look back. One by one, the rest of the pack followed, vanishing into the night like shadows retreating from the dawn. The scarred wolf stood still, listening, waiting, ensuring they were truly gone. Only when the silence returned did it finally turn its attention to the cub. The tiny creature trembled, its wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. It did not understand what had just happened. It only knew that the monster that had threatened to end its life had now saved it. The scarred wolf took a cautious step closer. The cub flinched but did not run. It had nowhere to go. No mother, no family, no home. And then something unexpected happened. The scarred wolf lowered its head and nudged the cub gently. It was not an attack, not a warning. It was something else, something strange, something that went against the very nature of their world. It was an offering, a silent promise. For the first time since losing its mother, the cub was no longer alone. The forest had returned to silence, but the tension lingered in the cool night air. The scarred wolf stood motionless, towering over the trembling cub. The moonlight revealed every battle-worn mark on its body, evidence of a life spent in survival, a testament to its resilience. It had chased away the pack, but the true question remained: why had it intervened? The cub, still weak and confused, stared up at the massive figure before it. His instincts told him to run, to seek shelter, but there was nowhere left to go. His tiny body quivered as the wolf's piercing eyes studied him. There was no hunger in them, no trace of cruelty, but there was something else, something deeper. The wolf lowered its head once more and nudged the cub, a slow and deliberate motion. The cub flinched but did not move away. He had never seen a wolf behave like this. His mother had always warned him about predators, about the dangers lurking beyond their territory. Yet this wolf had done something unthinkable. It had fought for him, not against him. The cub remained curled up, exhausted beyond measure. He had spent days alone, hungry and frightened, running from dangers he barely understood. His body could no longer keep up with his fear. His eyes fluttered, heavy with exhaustion, but still he tried to remain alert. The scarred wolf took a slow step back, giving the cub space. Then without a sound, it turned and walked away, its large paws sinking into the soft forest floor. The cub watched it go, his heart pounding. Was it leaving him? Had it only scared off the pack to claim the meal for itself? His breaths grew shallow, his weak limbs trembling as he tried to push himself up. If the wolf decided to attack, he would not be able to fight back. But the wolf did not attack. It did not even look back. It walked a few paces before stopping. Then it turned its head slightly, waiting. The cub blinked. His small mind struggled to understand. Then the wolf moved forward again, slowly, deliberately. After a few more steps, it stopped once more, waiting. The cub realized it wanted him to follow. His tiny ears perked, but his body remained still, frozen in place. Was this a trick? A game played by a predator to test his reaction? Or was it something else? The wolf remained patient. It did not rush him. It did not force him. It only waited. For the first time in his short life, the cub faced a decision that was entirely his own. He could stay behind, alone and helpless, or he could trust the creature that had just saved him from certain death. A gust of wind rustled through the trees, carrying the lingering scent of the wolf pack that had nearly ended his life. The cub shivered. If he stayed, he would not last the night. He was weak. He was starving. He had no one. His small, unsteady paws shifted against the dirt. His body swayed as he fought the exhaustion weighing him down. Slowly, cautiously, he placed one paw in front of the other. His steps were feeble, his legs barely holding him upright, but he followed. The scarred wolf did not react. It only turned and continued forward, leading him deeper into the wilderness. The cub trailed behind, his breath shallow, his energy fading fast. Every step felt heavier than the last. His vision blurred, his tiny limbs growing weaker with each movement. He tried to keep up, but the world around him was spinning. Then, without warning, his body gave out. His legs crumpled beneath him, and he collapsed into the cold earth. His eyes flickered open and shut, his mind drifting between wakefulness and unconsciousness. He barely registered the large shadow moving toward him. Then, warmth, a heavy presence beside him, a protective weight curled around his frail body. The cub did not fight it. He did not question it. For the first time since losing his mother, he felt safe. And before the darkness of sleep overtook him, he let out a final, soft breath of relief. The orphaned cub had been saved, but the mystery remained. Why? And what would happen when the morning came? The morning arrived in soft golden light, filtering through the dense canopy of trees. The cub stirred, his tiny body nestled against the warmth of something solid, something strong. His small ears twitched as he blinked away the haze of exhaustion. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then, as his senses sharpened, reality set in. The scarred wolf lay beside him, its body curled protectively around his own. The sight should have terrified him, but it didn't. Instead, an unfamiliar feeling crept into his heart, one he hadn't known since his mother's last breath. Safety. The wolf was awake, watching him with unreadable eyes. There was no hunger in its gaze, no threat in its posture. It had stayed. It had guarded him through the night. The cub should have run, should have feared for his life, but something inside him told him he didn't have to. He was too young to understand the ways of the wild, too innocent to grasp the weight of what had happened. A bear and a wolf were never meant to walk the same path, never meant to share space without bloodshed. Yet here they were, an orphaned cub and a lone wolf, bound together by something even nature itself could not explain. The scarred wolf stretched its weary limbs and rose to its feet, shaking the morning dew from its thick coat. The cub watched in silence, his small body still too weak to move. Hunger gnawed at his belly, but it was nothing new. He had grown used to the ache. The wolf turned to him and let out a low grunt. Not a growl, but a sound of acknowledgement. Then, without hesitation, it padded away into the forest. The cub's ears perked, his body stiffening. Was it leaving him? Was this where their strange encounter ended? Panic swelled in his tiny chest. He did not want to be alone again. His mind screamed at him to get up, to follow, but his body would not obey. His limbs ached, his paws felt too heavy to move. He was still too weak. Minutes passed. The forest remained still. The cub's breath quickened as loneliness settled over him like a crushing weight. Had he been abandoned again? Had he been a fool to trust something he did not understand? Then, footsteps, soft, measured, deliberate. The scarred wolf emerged from the trees, something clutched in its jaws. It dropped the item onto the ground in front of the cub. A piece of meat, freshly caught. The cub's nose twitched as the scent of food filled his nostrils. His stomach clenched, his hunger overwhelming. He had never eaten meat before. His mother had fed him with milk, with berries, with soft roots she had dug from the earth. But food was food, and hunger did not wait for familiarity. He hesitated. Was this a test? Was he being lured into a trap? His instincts wavered between caution and desperation, but the wolf did not move, did not push him. It only waited. Slowly, the cub inched forward, sniffing the offering. His small tongue flicked out, tasting the unfamiliar flesh. It was strange, different, but his body did not care. He bit down, chewing slowly, his strength returning with each bite. The wolf watched him, its expression unreadable. The cub could not know that this act, a predator feeding what should have been its prey, was something almost unheard of in the wild. The wolf had made a choice. For reasons only it understood, it had decided to protect him. The cub did not know why, and perhaps he never would. But as he ate, as the first warmth of the morning sun touched his fur, one thing became certain. He was not alone anymore. He had been saved. But what lay ahead was a question neither of them could answer. The scarred wolf stood still, watching as the cub devoured the scraps of food. It did not move closer, did not demand thanks. It simply observed in silence. The cub, too young to question the unusual kindness of a predator, only knew that for the first time in days he was no longer starving. Each bite brought strength back to his fragile body, but the exhaustion still weighed him down like a heavy stone. As he chewed, his ears flicked at a distant sound. The forest, usually alive with the chatter of birds and the rustling of unseen creatures, had gone unnaturally silent. A chilling breeze swept through the trees, carrying with it a familiar scent, one that made the scarred wolf tense instantly. The cub did not yet understand, but the wolf did. The pack had returned. The scarred wolf's body stiffened, its head tilting slightly as it listened. Low growls, faint but undeniable, rippled through the trees. The younger wolves had not accepted their loss. They had left the night before, humiliated but not defeated. And now they had come back to reclaim what they believed was theirs. The cub's fur bristled as he sensed the shift in the air. He did not know what was coming, but he could feel the tension in his protector's stance. His small body trembled as he lowered himself closer to the ground, instinct taking over. A shadow moved between the trees. then another, and another. They were not attacking yet, but they were close, testing, watching. The pack leader, the one who had been bested, had brought reinforcements. Their loyalty to him had been shaken, but hunger was stronger than pride. If they could not challenge the scarred wolf in a one-on-one battle, they would take what they wanted by force. The scarred wolf remained still, exuding a quiet authority, but inside it knew the truth. It had fought off one wolf, but an entire pack was different. The lone wolf had no one to back it up, no allies to turn to. The pack leader stepped forward, its golden eyes locked onto its former alpha. The low growl in its throat carried a clear message. Move aside. The scarred wolf did not budge. A cold wind swept through the trees as both wolves stared each other down. The younger leader snarled, inching forward, its muscles tight, its ears pinned back. The others followed suit, stepping into view, forming a deadly semicircle around their target. The orphaned cub let out a frightened whimper, pressing himself closer to the dirt, but the scarred wolf did not look away. The pack leader moved first, a slow, deliberate step. Then another. The others followed, their teeth bared, their eyes glowing with the unspoken promise of violence. The scarred wolf took a deep breath. If this was how it ended, it would not go down without a fight. But just as the first wolf prepared to lunge, a sound stopped them all. A deep, rumbling growl, but it did not come from the scarred wolf. It came from the cub. It was faint, weak, barely more than a vibration in his tiny chest, but it was there. A cub, a creature that should have cowered in silence, was standing his ground. His small, fragile body trembled, his eyes wide with fear, but still he let out another tiny growl. It should have been meaningless. It should have been ignored. And yet, for a single fleeting moment, it made the pack hesitate. The scarred wolf seized the moment. It did not growl. It did not lunge. It simply stepped forward, placing itself fully between the cub and the pack. Its head lowered, ears perked, eyes steady. A silent declaration. This cub was not theirs. The pack leader bared its fangs. This was not the ending it had wanted. It was supposed to reclaim what it had lost, to restore its dominance. But the scarred wolf was not stepping aside. The tension in the air grew thick, the forest waiting for the final move. Then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the pack leader let out a sharp exhale and took a step back. The others hesitated but followed. One by one, they retreated into the shadows, their golden eyes flickering one last time before disappearing completely. The fight was over. The scarred wolf remained motionless, waiting, listening. Only when the final scent of the pack had faded did it relax. It had won, not through brute force, but through something far greater. The cub, still shaking, looked up at his protector with wide, uncertain eyes. He did not yet understand what had happened, but one truth was clear. The scarred wolf had chosen him, and from that moment on, the orphaned cub was no longer just a lost soul in the wilderness. He had been claimed. The forest had returned to its natural rhythm. The whispers of the wind wove through the trees, the rustling of leaves blending with the distant calls of unseen creatures. The pack was gone. The battle was over. But for the orphaned cub, something even greater had changed. He was no longer alone. The scarred wolf stood in the fading moonlight, its watchful gaze still fixed on the shadows where the pack had vanished. Its body remained tense, ears flicking at every distant sound. It had won this time, but the wild was never without danger. Another challenge could come at any moment. The cub, still weak, lay where he had been, his small frame pressed close to the earth. His mind was a whirlwind of exhaustion, hunger, and confusion. He had been ready to accept his fate, but fate had chosen otherwise. His protector, the one creature that should have been his greatest enemy, had saved him, and not just once. The scarred wolf turned its head, its gaze finally settling on the cub. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, as if sensing the unspoken question between them, the wolf let out a quiet huff and turned away. It began to walk, its powerful frame moving effortlessly through the trees. The cub's ears twitched. Was it leaving? Was this strange, fleeting alliance over? His small body tensed as panic flickered in his chest. He had been alone before, but now, after everything, he did not want to be. The scarred wolf walked a few paces, then stopped. It did not look back, but its posture shifted slightly, expectant, waiting. The cub hesitated. His legs still ached, his stomach empty, his energy nearly depleted. But something inside him, something primal and instinctive, told him he could not stay where he was. If he remained here, he would die. With slow, unsteady movements, he pushed himself up. His tiny legs wobbled beneath him, his paws barely able to grip the forest floor. But he did not fall. Step by step he followed. The scarred wolf did not hurry. It did not urge him forward or turn to check if he was keeping up. It simply moved at a steady pace, ensuring the cub could trail behind. They walked in silence, the forest swallowing them as they disappeared into the night. By the time the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink, the cub's body was screaming in protest. He had not stopped moving since the moment he stood up, and now every muscle in his small frame ached with exhaustion. His paws burned from the rough terrain, his vision blurred from the effort to keep going. And then, just as he thought he could not take another step, the wolf finally slowed. They had arrived. The cub blinked up at the place before him, a small clearing hidden deep within the forest, surrounded by thick trees and dense underbrush. It was quiet here, untouched by the outside world. The scent of old hunts lingered in the air, but it was not fresh. The scarred wolf had not lived here in some time. The wolf padded forward, stepping into the clearing as if reclaiming an old memory. The cub hesitated at the edge, his tiny body swaying from exhaustion. He did not know what this place was. He did not know if he truly belonged here. But then, the scarred wolf did something unexpected. It turned back toward the cub and, for the first time, lowered itself onto the ground. It stretched out, its massive frame settling into the earth, its head resting on its paws. It was an invitation, silent yet unmistakable. The cub did not think twice. His wobbly legs carried him forward, and with the last bit of energy he had, he curled up against the warmth of the scarred wolf's side. The moment his body touched the wolf's fur, exhaustion consumed him. His eyes fluttered shut, and for the first time in days, sleep came easily. He had found shelter. He had found warmth. And though he did not yet understand it, he had found something else, something far more powerful than instinct or survival. He had found a home. The cub slept deeply, his tiny body rising and falling with steady breaths, his exhaustion finally subdued by the comfort of warmth and safety. For the first time since losing his mother, he did not wake in fear. He did not startle at the rustling of leaves or the distant calls of the wild. He was not alone anymore. The scarred wolf lay beside him, motionless, listening to the sounds of the forest. Its body remained tense, ever watchful, but there was something different in its posture, something softer. It had taken in this cub, a creature it should have had no reason to protect. Yet something had driven it to do so. A past it did not speak of, a memory buried deep. When the sun finally peeked through the canopy, the wolf rose. It stretched its powerful limbs, shook the morning dew from its fur, and glanced down at the still sleeping cub. He had fought so hard to survive, yet now he slept like he belonged. The wolf studied him for a moment longer, then turned away. It vanished into the trees without a sound. The cub stirred, the absence of warmth making his tiny ears flicker. His eyes fluttered open, and for a split second, panic gripped his chest. Had it all been a dream? Had he imagined the presence of his protector? His small body tensed as he lifted his head, searching. Then a sound, soft footsteps, a familiar scent. The scarred wolf reappeared, carrying something in its jaws. The cub's nose twitched, and his stomach twisted in hunger as he recognized the scent of food. The wolf dropped a small piece of meat onto the ground before him, then stepped back, watching. Hunger outweighed hesitation. The cub ate, chewing the unfamiliar texture, his body slowly regaining its strength. The wolf did not eat. It only observed, its expression unreadable. When the cub had finished, the wolf turned once more and began to walk. The cub watched uncertain. Then it happened again. The wolf paused, waiting. The cub blinked. It was the same silent invitation as before. He hesitated, his small body still weak, but something inside him, something more powerful than fear, urged him forward. He did not know where they were going, or why the wolf had chosen him, but he knew he did not want to be left behind, and so he followed. The days that followed were unlike anything the cub had ever known. The scarred wolf did not coddle him, nor did it slow its pace. It moved with purpose, forcing the cub to keep up, to push himself beyond what his frail body thought possible. At first it was impossible. His legs ached, his breath came in short gasps, and every step felt like a battle against exhaustion. But he adapted. Each morning the wolf led him to water, showing him how to drink from the stream. Each afternoon it brought him food, tearing small pieces to ensure he could chew. And each night they returned to the clearing, where the cub curled against the wolf's side, his body too weak to do anything but sleep. Slowly he changed. His once fragile legs grew steadier. His clumsy steps became more precise. His senses sharpened. The wolf taught him without words, without force, only through action. It would pause near scents, waiting for him to notice. It would listen to the wind, showing him how to sense what lurked beyond the trees. One evening, the wolf led him to a fallen tree, thick with moss and insects. The cub hesitated, unsure of what he was meant to do. The wolf simply stood there waiting. Then realization struck. This was a test. The cub sniffed the air, searching, following the trail of something small and hidden. His tiny claws scraped against the wood, his instincts guiding him for the first time. And when he finally uncovered a small, wriggling creature, something deep inside him awakened. Pride. The scarred wolf made no sound, but the approval in its gaze was unmistakable. The cub was learning. The cub was surviving. And for the first time since losing his mother, he was no longer just an orphan. He was something more. The days turned into weeks, and the orphaned cub was no longer the fragile creature he had once been. His steps grew firmer, his senses sharper, his body stronger. He was still small, still learning, but something had changed within him. He was no longer just a helpless cub trying to survive. He was a creature of the wild, adapting to the life he had been thrust into. But the greatest change of all was not in the cub alone. It was in the scarred wolf. The wolf, once solitary, had lived its life with no pack, no bonds, no loyalty to anything but survival. Yet day after day, it had chosen to stay, to teach, to guide. The bond between predator and prey, once an unbreakable law of nature, had been rewritten. They did not question it. They simply were. The cub followed without hesitation, not out of fear, but out of trust. The wolf protected him, not out of obligation, but out of something far deeper, something neither of them could explain. Their strange companionship did not go unnoticed. The other creatures of the forest watched in silence. Birds tilted their heads in curiosity, deer paused in the underbrush, foxes observed from the shadows. A bear cub walking beside a lone wolf was not something the wild had ever seen. It was unnatural, impossible, and yet it was real. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, the cub found himself by the river's edge. He had grown used to the sound of running water, the scent of wet earth, the coolness of the air as the day faded into night. But this time, something was different. He saw his reflection. For the first time since his mother's death, he truly looked at himself. His fur was no longer as soft as it had once been. His limbs, once weak and trembling, now held a quiet strength. But more than anything, he saw the eyes staring back at him. They were no longer filled with fear. The cub lifted his head. Behind him, the scarred wolf watched, silent as ever. The cub met its gaze, and for the first time, he understood. He was not just a cub who had been saved. He was not just a lost creature that had been spared. He had become something else, a survivor, a part of something greater. The wolf turned away first, stepping back into the trees, moving as it always did, without hesitation, without fear. But this time, the cub did not scramble to follow. He stood for a moment longer, looking at the reflection of the creature he had become. Then he turned and followed. The forest had whispered its doubts. The wild had questioned their bond, but they had proven something no other beast had. Survival was not always about strength. Sometimes it was about the choice to stand together. And as they disappeared into the vastness of the wilderness, their story became a legend, one whispered by the wind, carried by the rivers, and remembered by the trees. A tale of an orphaned cub and the lone wolf who chose to protect him. An impossible friendship, bound not by blood but by fate. And fate, as the wild had learned that day, did not follow rules. It created its own. If this story moved you, imagine how many more incredible tales nature has to offer. The wild is full of unexpected friendships, unbreakable bonds, and survival against all odds. Don't miss out on more heartwarming and breathtaking stories. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and join us on this journey through the untamed world. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that will leave you in awe. Your adventure into the wild starts here.